Welcome to Change the Narrative. I'm your host, JD Fuller, an African-American licensed psychotherapist, professor, diversity coach, consultant, and author. We talk about the isms. We talk about the phobias, anything that marginalizes and oppresses. Everything we are not and everything we are is because of fear. Through a mental health lens, we'll have difficult conversations with celebrity guests, political activists, and everyone in between. Our mind will tell us whatever we want to believe, but the truth lives in the body, and that's where change occurs. Are you ready to change the narrative?
You know, it's so funny because there are people who I just vibe on right away, and I just have to know who they are. And they're never big time celebrities. They're always people who are celebrities in my eyes because they're doing the work that I admire and I appreciate and that I've been doing for years. But now it's a whole next level with social media. And so I'm very honored to have you here today. I say all of that just to say that.
Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be here, and I appreciate the work you're doing. And, it's just great. Social media has a way of connecting folks that are like-minded. And so I'm very grateful for social media, and I'm very grateful for you giving me the opportunity to come and just chat with you and kick it with you. So
thank you. Because I know I can be pushy, but this time my pushiness worked out. So I'm good. Okay, so let's get into it. The language you use to identify yourself is so important because we all are finding a way to articulate our identities. And so I want you to break it down because not everybody knows what you mean when you say you identify as American by nationality, Colombian by ethnicity, Afro-Latino by culture, Black by race, and Pan-African by politics. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was born in Colombia, but I came here when I was a kid. And so I grew up here in the United States. So my nationality, the country where I have my national identity is here. I'm American, right? But my ethnicity, which is my ethnic culture is Colombian, right? So my entire family is Colombian. So our traditions, our food is influenced a lot by that. I say I'm Afro-Latino by culture because, I'm Latino, but I'm mixed. So half my family's Black and half my family's white, or white native admixture, and so that describes kind of my culture, and a lot of which is very distinct from Latino culture and Latino culture as we know it here in the United States. Afro-Latino culture is very distinct. Black people in Latin America have a very unique way of talking, a unique way of communicating, a unique way of having fun, and they also have unique struggles as well. Absolutely. And so to me, it's not just a genetic admixture, it's also a cultural admixture because these two communities navigate the world differently. And I embody that. And then, I think I say I'm Black by race because it's very important to me to really connect with that side of my race, right? I think when I don't navigate the world as a white man, and so and it's interesting to me because I think a lot of times when I'm in the United States, I'm not always racialized as a Black person, right? And but that is that does describe who I am. And when you think about no one ever says Barack Obama, you are white, right? Even though half his family is white, right? Right. But for some reason, when it comes to Latinos, you oftentimes do get that, right? And so for me, being able to say that I'm Black and being proud of that is important. And then lastly, I'm Pan-African by politics because I believe in the liberation of all Black people. And whether it's in the United States, or whether it's in the Caribbean, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's in Africa, we all have very similar struggles. When it comes to Colombia, I'll give you an example. You have about 1/4 of the population is Black. It's the 4th largest Black population, right? And even then, 3/4 of the Colombian population, 3/4 of the poor population in Colombia is Black, right? And so you see that disparity where you see that people of color are facing the worst disparities in terms of income, in terms of wealth, in terms of health. And so when I say I'm Pan-African, that speaks to a politic that I believe that I believe in the liberation and freedom of all Black people, and I advocate and I push for that. And that is central to my identity, essential to the way I move and the way I see problems. And I center that in my work.
You see me over here cheesing like that, you know, I'm just grinning because I just am vibing with everything you're saying. And I love how you broke that down. I think it is important for you to be able to identify the way in which you choose to, because we all should have the right, number one. But the second thing is that, you know, people of color are the global majority. And until we start acting like that, we're not going to find the economic power that we honestly have, even in poverty. You know, we decide where our dollars go. It makes a greater impact on the construct of things. And so the fact that, you know, I embrace the Afro-Latino culture, and I also want the Spanish-speaking community to realize we're in this together. I mean, you may have immigrated here, but they will target you the way they target me. So we need to figure out how to become the global majority united across cultures. The Asian community has had that wake up call, you know, and so we have to realize there's power in numbers, and we have the numbers, which is why white supremacy is so afraid right now. I mean, that's the reality.
Absolutely. You know, and I think, you know, the truth is also within Latino culture in and of itself, there has to be a real reckoning with race as well.
Yes.
And so when I state that, I'm also trying to push against that. I want people to think about it, because so much of our history has taught us that there is no race in Latin America, when the lived experience of people of color, of Black people in Latin America, is that there is, right? And so we're, you know, and that was done intentionally throughout countries in Latin America, from Brazil to Colombia. This idea that we're all just, you know, we're all Brazilian or we're all Colombian, and there's no Black and white. It was done intentionally as a way to push us aside from our Blackness, and as a way to unify our country, but without addressing the very real implications of being Black, for example, right? And so they you know, so I think part of why I am constantly mentioning race is because I want people to realize that all Colombians aren't treated the same and don't navigate the world the same. Right? We all don't look like J-Lo or like Ricky Martin or like Maluma, right? Like we all don't navigate the world that way. And it's not just how we look; it's also the wealth that we inherit and the social conditions that we're born into, right? I grew up in Cartagena, which is one of the largest enslaved ports for enslaved people in South America, in addition to Salvador, Brazil. And it's a Black city, where, you know, over 80% of the population is Black. All our murals are of Black people. I mean, we are the epicenter of Afro-conscious in Latin America, along with Salvador, Brazil, and we take pride in that, right? But most people don't know that. But when I say that because within the city that I'm from, even though is a highly touristed city, there's a lot of poverty. The majority of the population is in poverty. The majority of the population is Black, but when you go to the city, you will not experience that, right? And so I just think it's important that we are constantly, even amongst Latinos, that they're constantly positioning themselves within larger society and recognizing the privileges and that they carry, and using that to help other people along. So,
you know, you touched on something I want to get your perspective on. You know, I don't think people of color have privilege. That's not my language. My language is that some have more access than others, but privilege in America especially is totally aligned with skin color. So I just want to, I like to draw that distinction, because then people will be like, oh, we all have privilege. No, we don't all have privilege. And you know, I'm wondering what role immigration plays in this, right? Because the whole mentality about immigration is proximity to whiteness, you know, and it's deeply ingrained and unconscious in the immigrant struggle to get here in order to get closer to what is identified as successful, which in our country is aligned with whiteness. I'm wondering what part that plays in this process of embracing the different colors within the Latino culture.
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I think immigration is complex, and I think that the reasons why people immigrate is very different, depending on
Yes,
region, depending on country, right? You have
absolutely.
political refugees,
Hmm.
like folks from Cuba and Venezuela, and you have economic refugees, like folks from Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, etc.
Right.
Um, and so I do think that the reasons why people come here um, are very different, and I wouldn't say it is always for the sake of wanting to align themselves with whiteness. I think
Hmm.
that unfortunately, whiteness is aligned with success in America, and
There you
whiteness
go.
is aligned with economic prosperity, and
Hmm.
whiteness is aligned with financial freedom, and whiteness is aligned with generational wealth and homes and the American dream. Like, that is the construct of whiteness, is all of that. And so in chasing some of those other things, I think you sometimes, to achieve that, um, you get sucked into this construct of whiteness that they sell you,
Hmm.
and you see it being embraced by some groups more than others, right?
Yes,
And you see it in how some groups vote, right? And you
absolutely.
see it. So I think it's certainly very complex.
I love how you phrased that much better than I did. Thank you so much, because I do not want to act as if it's about coming to get proximity to whiteness. Not at all. There's a struggle. People don't wake up one day and just say, I want to go to America and align with whiteness. So I really appreciate you reframing that in a way that makes more sense and is much more accurate a perspective of people's reality. Thank you. So again, appreciate you reframing that the way you did. It's I am totally on point with what you're saying. And you say that your views are shaped by your experiences and identities, part of which is based in your immigration experience to the US, which you've spoken of a little bit, but also growing up poor in a two-parent household. Will you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the first signs that you are not white, right, is oftentimes how you're born. I
Hmm.
read somewhere, oh, the first time I found out I was black is when I was born. When I was born, I was born poor, and that
Oh.
was it changes your perspective,
Hmm.
right? The question was like, oh, when was the first time you thought about your race? And they said, well, the first time it was when I was born, and it was because I was born poor. And I think that changes how you view the world. You know,
Hmm.
I was born poor as well. I had nothing. I was born in this city, in a poor town in Cartagena, uh, and came to the United States, and I moved to Central Falls, which is also is a poor city in the state of Rhode Island. If you know Viola Davis, I'm from the same city
Yeah.
she's from, and
Okay.
so it was I that being part of that, growing up with nothing, it kind of makes you really uh, approach politics and approach the world differently, um, and it positions you in the world in a very unique way, I think. And the way you relate to people is different, and the way you relate to things are different, and to materials is different. Um, so I think, I was one of those kids. I worked at McDonald's for 2 years right before college. Um, I worked with my parents. My dad was a janitor, custodian, and I would go with him to clean the YMCA's, or he worked at the mall as well, and I would go with him to do that.
Hmm.
So so yeah, so I think that was all very formative for me, and it shaped how I view the world. Um, and it didn't end there, right? You think that you go to college and all of a sudden you are going to be entrusted into wealth, and that's what I
Right.
thought. At least I was very naive. But you go to college, and I still came out in the same material conditions that I was when I went in, except that I was in
Mhm.
debt, right? So I think that um, you know that experience, moving to the United States as an immigrant, I think changes how you also even view other people who come to the United States, right? Right?
Okay.
Because if I came to the United States and I was able to become a doctor, I think that other people should have the opportunity to do so too. And if I being in Colombia with my sister who was in Venezuela, right? She lived there for a while. I saw the stuff that they were going through there. And so it gives you compassion for other folks too. So it really does change your entire perspective. Thankfully, I did come with a 2-parent household, and I think that also changes people's perspectives, right? And that, I grew up with having 2 people around that had my back, right? And it wasn't just one person trying to do it all by themselves, like many folks in the United States do. So all of that, I think, shapes how I engage with the world. And I think the reason why I'm very explicit about that is because I think we all need to do that. I think especially in academia or in medicine, where or in scientific fields, where people think that we're all coming from an unbiased place, and that is all about facts, and all science is pure. And we bring our perspectives and our experiences to our science. We bring our perspectives and our experience to the patient encounter. We bring our perspectives and our experiences to politics, right? Politicians do this all the time, and you see it. And so to pretend that that's not true, or that doesn't happen, feels disingenuous to me. And so for me, I just want you to know, like, everything I say, that's the perspective I come from. And that might help you either be more receptive to it, or at least understand why I feel and believe the way I do.
You just brought up 2 things for me. One is that I co-sign on that completely. When I start to teach a class at the graduate level, the first thing I say is I teach through my Blackness, and don't think your white professors don't do the same thing, because I do think it's important to put that out there as a consciousness, so I appreciate that very much. The other thing is, what do you think happens to people who lose that part of themselves, right? So you talk about how it informs who you are and how you approach everything. What do you think about that code switching, and you forget the code switch back and pull some people up? What do you think of that?
I think code switching is so interesting. I think it is originated as a form of survival, right? As a means of survival. I mean, you do what you need to be able to get by in a hostile environment, right? And that's how you deal, is you try to fit in, you try to be less noticed. But I think in the midst of that, you do dim down part of who you are and what makes you unique and original. And so I think that there are folks that I unfortunately do feel that they do get lost in that. But I think that does a disservice to them, and I think it does a disservice to the rest of us. So if I'm ever code switching, best believe that if I ever get to the point where I don't fear, right? Because I think a lot of times we code switch because of fear. Like, if we act how we are most truest, authentic selves, if we bring that to the workplace, we might get reprimanded, we might experience repercussions. But I would hope that if I ever get to the point where when I am the leader of my department or of my unit, where I can make it so that people don't have to code switch, right? Where people don't feel that they have to sacrifice parts of who they are in order to survive and thrive and do well in the workplace.
I love that.
And so I feel like when you forget that, you end up perpetuating the cycle of violence, institutional oppression. I mean, I think the need to code switch exists because of the need to try to survive in a violent environment. And so I think when you forget that, you end up perpetuating that same environment that you hated once.
I love that. I love that. Dr. William Cross explained it so well. I used him in my thesis in grad school, why it happened, why it continues to happen, and what happens when you don't remember who you are and where you come from. So I appreciate that. And I don't know, I don't have that concern about you as you move along in your career.
No, man. I mean, you are. And you have to be, because the world is going to want to change you. The world is going to want to make you what they want you to be. And I think remembering like who you are and why you do, what community you belong to and why you do what you do, and who you're doing it for, like, I really think keeps you grounded, so that when things happen, you're not shaken. and you stand firm in who you are. So for sure.
You know, and shaken, how can you not be shaken with the daily racial trauma? But when you can look to the side, like when I look at activists like you, all of a sudden I feel a little bit more grounded, because I'm like, I'm not alone. I've been doing this a lot of years, but now I can see others in the same line of fire, and we're not alone. And there is something empowering about that.
Absolutely. And that's something that I've also realized too, the more I've been unapologetically myself, and like you find your allies, right? You find your co-conspirators, you find folks in the trenches. And it actually can be used as a defense mechanism, right? Like you are your authentic self, so that the people who don't mess with you don't, are not, they literally weed themselves out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, like you think that it's going to expose you to harm, but you find that those people just get out your way. And the people, and sometimes it does, but I do feel like you end up finding a community of people who are willing to shake the system and are willing to say what needs to be said, even if it goes against the status quo. And I think that's where we are. I think that's where our generation is. Like, I think at this point in time, with everything that happened, that's been happening, right? None of this is new. Nothing I say here is unique. Everything has been done before and said before, right? It's like the same thing. I mean, you could hear it in Tupac's lyrics. You can literally, like, everything that I talk about is the same thing that other people have talked about before.
Absolutely.
But I think that right now, if we're at a point where more of us are willing to be unapologetic about it, and vocal about it, and I think some good things are coming out of it, but we still got a lot of work to do.
It gives me hope, like I said before, because I'm 30 years into this game and was often standing by myself with my big mouth, challenging things and systems. And so now it's so cool to see younger people, doing it the way that you're doing it. I just, I just value it so much. I'm at a loss for words for it, to be perfectly honest with you. I have much gratitude for it.
And we have gratitude, for folks who have been doing it longer than us, right? Like you, and it's always Black women too. That's the thing. You guys have been paving the way, like, for forever, right? And so, a lot of my, scholastic intellectual heroes are all Black women, right? And we wouldn't be able to have the tools like these. That's why we got to protect it. When I study, when I write about critical race theory, I mean, we have to protect these. They're trying to destroy our heroes. And these people gave us the tools to be able to name things, to be able to fight for things. And we have to protect them and their work and carry it along. But not, like I said, I think everything, we must build on what's already been done. And so, I'm always grateful when I see folks like you who've been doing it for a while too, because it helps me know that, like, I can get to that, people have been doing it before me, and they're still riding with me. Right. And I hope to be riding with someone like that too, an up and coming, physician or scholar. Right. I hope to one day be that for someone else too.
Clearly we have so much to talk about. We're going to do this in 2 parts. So join us again for the second half of this show. All right. Now we're going to move on. Okay. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit to who you are and my fascination with you. So you're a physician, an artist, an activist, organizer. Can you talk about how all parts of yourself inform each other? Because they're different, right? They don't all naturally integrate. So how do they form all of who you are? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a physician, but it's important to know why I went into medicine. I went into medicine because I didn't find people that looked like me when I was seeking healthcare. My parents didn't find that, and I wanted to be the physician that I never had. And so I approached medicine from that social justice angle, and I always saw medicine as a vehicle for social justice, because I think health is fundamental to for us to survive, right? You can't do
Yeah.
anything if you are not healthy. And so I view health as empowerment, and I view it as a tool for social justice. I think as I started getting in this field, very early on, I realized that medicine has been one of the worst perpetrators of inequality in this country, right? They've done some of the most hideous crimes against Black people. They've, right, when we talk about the misrepresentation or the lack of representation in medicine, that was due to the Flexner report. 5 out of 7 Black, medical schools were shut down as a result of that. And now we're seeing the effects of that, right? We have less than 5% of physicians are Black, right? Less than 6% of physicians are Latino. And this was all, we did that, right? And so the more that I'm in this field, the more I realize, yes, medicine is a tool for social justice, but is also a tool for harm.
Yes.
And historically, it has been used and misused to perpetuate violence against our communities. And so how do you undo that, right? And how do you undo that? How do you address that? How do you reconcile with that history? And then how do you move forward in a way that actually improves the health of our communities? And so that is how that journey has been. It's just that the more I'm in this field, it's like, wow, we really do some messed up shit.
Yeah.
Right? Like, and the way that we treat race, not only during medical education, but in medical practice with race corrections, for example, the way, even when we think about pulse oximetry, which we use to measure oxygen levels, right? And we know that these pulse oximetry, they don't work as good on darker skin. They make it seem like you have more oxygen than you do. And then there was a recent report that showed that people who had COVID, who had a need for oxygen, were not getting it because their oxygen levels are being misread. And so, and that's because they failed to think about our people, right? They failed to take our people into account during the design of it, during the implementation of it, during the beta testing of these machines. And so now we have machines that are widely used by the entire country that are not, that are harmful or not treating everyone equally. And so we find constant examples of this in medicine. And so I think there's a need for folks like me who are willing to disrupt that.
Yes.
And so that is part of it. I was an artist. I was an art major. I was a painter, and actually, my work focused on the intersections of culture and race and art. And so I did murals, and a lot of my inspirations were the murals in East LA. And it really, the reason why that's important is because I think creativity is so important for movements. And I've seen the power of art, of creativity and changing the way people think and about problems and raising consciousness, right? And so to the extent that I can bring that into my work, that creativity, I think it would only help me to get my message across, which is, the liberation of Black folk. And so that is kind of how that fits in. And yeah, I think, it just all comes together. I think again, it's just we need all the tools we can get. And I believe that it's not just in medicine. We have to look into other fields, art. We have to look into social work. We have, all these fields have to come together.
Look, the way you explained it, it just started to all blend together. It's very clear how the parts of yourself inform the other. And just hearing your passion behind it, it's very clear. Believe me, there's no more to be said. Look,
and as an organizer, I would say I worked, after I graduated, I worked for 4 years in Boston with Haitian, Black, and Latino communities. And I actually worked within churches to establish health ministries. And so I did community health education and community organizing, trying to get folks within parishes and churches to think about how they can transform their congregations to ones that promote health.
I love that.
So I did that for a while.
That's so important. You know, we are, there's all the reasons why we don't trust systems of, you know, mental and medical health. And that's what I'm hoping to be a part of changing, have been a part of hopefully changing for so many years, but you are definitely the future in making that happen. And again, I'm so grateful for it. Look, you take a strong position on issues impacting people from the global majority, but you also include people who live in poverty and the working class, just to name a few, or I'll name two off the back, which is Roe versus Wade and voter suppression. The reality of how white supremacy treats brown and Black bodies in different situations is very clear and inclusive in that group of oppressed people. Talk about why this is so clear to you and how you've messaged this in your social media and in direct contact with people.
I think that this attack on women's reproductive rights, and not just women, but, you know, trans men, you know, non-binary folk, it isn't new. It's been going on for a long time, and Black reproductive justice activists and scholars have been writing about this.
Right.
I think that it's taken on a new fervor. They're doing it with a lot more tenacity, in a way that is damaging, in a way that is dangerous. And so for me, we have to tackle that directly. There's no, like, we're gonna try to do this, we're gonna try to soften the message. Like, we need to be very clear about what they're doing, what the GOP conservative right is doing to strip people's rights away. Right. And it's, you know, they did it, they've been doing it with voting for a while. Right.
Yes.
Taking, you know, between taking away mail-in voting, trying to cut away at, you know, requiring, you know, ID for voting, taking away, I don't know if you remember a year ago where they were taking away mailboxes from districts.
Absolutely.
I mean, literally, like the things that you were like, wow, preventing people from selling water and giving snacks to voters. I mean, like, they have done it in the most egregious ways, but also in the most petty ways, because they are going to do it in every way possible. And so when I think about the disenfranchisement of Black people in this country, and I think about the various ways from mass incarceration, right? We have, for example, in Florida, like 1 in 5 folk have a prior felony conviction and can't vote, right? That's crazy.
I know.
And so when these tools of making things felonies to then disenfranchise folks, that has been done before. They've done it to Black people. And now they're starting to make a criminal, make it a felony for women to seek reproductive health care. And so what do you think that's going to do to their voting rights?
Right.
And so I think that when they're constantly, you know, the thing about, you know, sorry, I think this room just shut off.
That's all right. You got to move around. That happened to me one time too, in a room I was doing the podcast in.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all good. Go ahead.
So yeah, for me, it's all this little game that they're using, and they're using the same tools, but they're applying it on different groups.
Absolutely.
And so we have to be cognizant of that. And history is our biggest teacher. And so, you know, for me, every time I see a new stunt, it's like I go back in history and I say, when has this been done before?
Right.
And how has it been used? And that informs how I approach that issue. And I try very clearly to make the connections, because because I'm a scholar of history. Like, I love history, and so I'm not, and so I try to make those connections clear for folks that maybe history is not something that they necessarily enjoy.
Right.
But this is, it's really egregious what's happening with, reproductive rights in this country. I know this podcast isn't about that, but I think that these are not just, it's not just reproductive rights. We're talking about rights to patient autonomy. We're talking about rights to patient privacy, all of that, right to religion, right? Because if you tell me that I can have abortion, but according to Jewish law, that is within the rights of a person, then you're infringing on my religious rights, right? And so it's I think that there's this massive attack right now on anyone who isn't white Protestant male, and I think until we see it that way, we're not going to come together to create the kind of unity and the kind of movements that we need to really enact change.
Absolutely. And this podcast is exactly about this.
Okay.
The other thing is that, white male Protestant and the females who birth them and also align in silence to uphold patriarchy and its whiteness. I think we keep missing that piece, and looking at white males, but not looking at the women who are right alongside of them, who have not just created but nurtured the support
and benefited, right? White male
absolutely.
adjacency is a thing, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, if it benefits your white husband, it's going to benefit you as a white female.
Absolutely.
Which is
Absolutely.
why when we look at voting for Trump, right, and both, right, like white women were the reasons why he got elected, and we got to be able to call it what it is. I mean, it's not.
I know.
It's just what it is, right? And we see that happen a lot with white women and the way that they navigate politics. And the truth is that they benefit from that, right? Because the whole family unit benefits, their sons benefit, right?
I know, it's powerful. It's powerful. I'm with you, brother. I'm with you. So you tweeted America is not okay after sharing horrible news about the deadliest human smuggling incident in recent years. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So, I mean, with a lot of immigration policy, you're seeing a lot of folks who come to the United States, oftentimes out of desperation. Many times these folks have been stuck in Mexico, in countries in Central America for a long time, trying to seek asylum to the United States. And because of our laws and our policies, they haven't been able to seek that asylum. And so they oftentimes are forced to pay coyotes to get them to the United States so they can achieve a better life and be able to feed their families, and be able to, achieve some sort of, dignity. Right. And unfortunately, there are folks who abuse that, right? And that's what you saw recently in San Antonio with the big truck that was found, right? Of just it was over 40 people dead, right?
So sad. So sad.
And these were just folks that were just trying to come to the United States to achieve a better dream and to achieve a better life for them and their families. And I think that America is not okay because of that. But I think just where we are as a country, our democracy is in jeopardy. We don't trust any of our systems of power, and that's a dangerous position to be. We don't trust the Supreme Court. We don't. Many folks don't trust the president, left and right, right, and the executive branch. And many of us are disillusioned by our elected officials in Congress. And so when you have a democracy where your three branches of government, there's lack of trust, you have a dangerous situation. And so I don't think America is okay. And we also are feeling it too. Like the people in their day-to-day are feeling it, right? Like folks are barely struggling to make ends meet, barely struggling, struggling to make put food on the table, and are losing their jobs, right? Are losing their investments, are losing their 401ks, have a bunch of loans, right, from school. Like, I mean, I think it's just like a lot of folks are not okay, and that's why you're seeing what we, where we are right now. I think it's because a lot of folks are not okay, and I think we just got to be honest about that.
Right. I agree with you. And I also think that people who are okay have to realize they will not be okay, because just because your positioning in life has afforded you some opportunities, the more that the majority stops being okay, the more it's going to impact you. So that's the disillusionment, as long as I'm okay, but that's not forever, because it happens, it changes.
And that middle income is, the middle class is shrinking in this country.
Exactly. That's an example of it.
It had been the same for a while, and now you're seeing it shrink because the rich folks are getting richer and richer and richer.
Exactly.
And that's also not good for a system.
Right.
And so I do think a lot more people, even folks that thought they were safe, for example, a lot of white women thought they were safe, and now with Roe v. Wade, they're like, oh, I'm not safe. They're coming after me too, right? Like, I think a lot more people are waking up to the idea that this democracy is not serving us how it should, and that we need to really work hard to fix it. And we have to implicate ourselves not only in the problem, but we have to implicate ourselves in the solution.
Absolutely. And get rid of the silence. It serves no one. As I started to say, your platforms are so important because you don't back down on anything. You talk about what's not working in America. Sometimes you say the quiet parts out loud, and people, including myself, clearly can't get enough of it. My two most recent favorite posts that you made were, don't miss racism when it's done by old people. Have we forgotten that racism is systemic? I love that. And the other one is, you clarified that adopting a child from the global majority does not exclude you from being racist nor benefiting from white supremacy. Talk about this a little bit, because those were two really important things that people don't often talk about.
I think it's just funny because both of them were in response to comments or situations that happened. So one of the first comment that I made was actually in response to a Black woman surgeon who was told by her patient, she's a surgeon in training, was told by her patient that Black women can't be surgeons and to go get the doctor in charge. And to be a surgeon, it's like 15 years, like it takes a long time. And for Black women, it's even harder because it's not just time. You're talking about institutional and systemic barriers that prevent Black women from being anything in this world.
Right.
When it comes to medicine, like 2% of doctors are Black women, right? And so you can imagine how hard it is to hear that from a patient and then at least expect some sort of support from the people around you, right? And so, she then relayed that information to the hospitalist, who's her partner in treating this patient. And he said, well, this patient is old. He doesn't know any better. And how is that helpful? Right? And so it just made me think about how often we dismiss racism when it's done by old folk. And what's problematic about that is because those are the very people we need to bring it to.
Exactly.
Right? Like especially when I'm talking to white people, like, though I want you to talk to your grandma and your father and your grandfather and your aunt, like, and those are the people that we need you to talk to.
Right.
And so why do we dismiss racism when old people do it? And even that in and of itself is ageist, because the underlying belief and why that often happens is that, they're never going to change, right? They're stuck in their ways, right? And if you study gerontology, that is like one of the main attitudes that are, ageist, right? The idea that older folk can learn new things when they absolutely can, and they can unlearn things as well. And so that whole thread was about just encouraging folk to not ignore the racism that happens by older folk in their family and in society, because those are the very people who are running our country.
Right.
Right. And so it serves no one. And it's funny because somebody else commented, like, absolutely, another white woman was like, absolutely, I agree. You know, I went over to my family's house and my mom was saying a bunch of nonsense and I packed my bags and left. And I'm just like, I wanted to be like, I haven't even responded yet, but I will. And I want to be like, you know, that does help no one. You're just literally pushing that responsibility onto the rest of us. What I want you to do is literally talk to your mom, talk to your relatives, like have those hard conversations. And if they cut you off, come back, right? Like take a break, but come back and continue to do the work, because all you're doing is punting that work onto us. So it's interesting how even in you know, she was agreeing, but the way she was going about it is not helpful.
Right.
And so I really think that we have to pay attention to how old people move, because how old people move determines how the laws in how our systems move.
Absolutely.
So that was the first piece. The second piece, can you just remind me again?
Adoption. You can still be racist and adopt a Black child or a child of color.
Again, I think we were talking about, it was a post I had done on police violence. And basically a cop in Chicago need a child into the concrete.
Horrific.
And right, because he thought that this kid stole a bike. Right. This brown kid with Afro hair, who was the only Afro person there. He accused this kid of stealing a bike, which is very common, right? This is like racial profiling 101. Like we're accused of stealing shit we didn't steal, of doing things we didn't steal, of doing things we didn't do, right? And then it wasn't just that, it wasn't just the accusation, but also the way that he went about it. It was an off-duty cop without uniform.
Crazy.
Who pinned this kid to the ground to the point that he couldn't breathe. And the comment was like, oh yeah, this was horrible, but you know, we shouldn't assume that this guy was racist because he might have adopted a Chinese kid. And so it brought up this idea that, like, just because you have a Chinese kid or any kid, right, doesn't make you not racist, right? If I am, you know, of mixed identity, if I'm Black, if I'm, you know, poor, if I grew up in this, and I have, you know, I think we all have racist attitudes, right? Because we're part of, we were born into the system that is racist. We're fed racism in the media and everything we consume. And so if some of us can admit that we've done things that maybe we shouldn't have, or we've moved in a way that maybe we shouldn't have, and you're excusing this man because he has an Asian kid, like, to me, it was just like, we need to just be very clear that having, you know, a non-white son or daughter does not make you anti-racist. Having a non-white, you know, husband or wife does not make you anti-racist. And even being non-white does not make you anti-racist, right?
So wait, there's a couple of things there. One is that only people of color can say non-white, just for the record, just so people understand. White people don't go around saying non-white. That's not for you. Just like BIPOC, that's not for you. Only we can say that. And the second thing is, you know, I think the general message that white people own racism and it's not something you can opt out of is a very important piece for people to wrap themselves around, because then they wouldn't be so nervous if somebody called them a racist. Okay, you may not be actively racist, but you still own racism. And what are you going to do about it? Like, that's the mentality. You have to make it stop being such a hot word and start to embrace the fact that it's the culture you benefit from. You can't opt out of it and say that person's racist. I'm not. You're a part of it, you know, and definitely adoption does not remove you from the responsibility and ownership. So I think that was fire. The other one is, let's see, voting rights, gun control, Miranda rights, reproductive rights. The Supreme Court is unhinged. Also, this is the best. Guns are not your God-given right. You sound stupid.
No, and I sometimes I crack myself up. But honestly,
I love that.
because you just have to call it what it is. Like, you sound silly. Do you not hear yourself? Like, I don't, like, and the weaponization of religion and faith is a whole other topic. And as someone who is God-fearing, right, it boggles my mind how it doesn't even it's so dangerous when when religion and faith are weaponized like that.
I agree.
So I just had to call it out.
Well, that was great. But and the part that that second part is even more important, which is, God didn't write the Second Amendment. People who enslaved others did. Slave owners did. Like, that's the part that just brings it all home for me. The second, that you sound stupid made me laugh, but that other part really brought it home for me.
Right.
Look, clearly we could go on. There's so much more that we could talk about together. Please say you'll return again.
Absolutely. Whenever you want. I'm yours in action. So.
Right on. I want people to learn. I want people to feel comfortable learning, and I'm trying to create a space where it's possible. But until then, will you offer advice to young people who want to be you? You said you spoke today, and I just think that's so important. So would you share a little bit of that, please?
Yeah, I guess I think we all have something unique to offer, and we all have to find that voice. And that the power in your voice comes in the power in your experiences.
Yes.
Right. So I'm able to reach folk. I think a lot of times because I have a very intersectional identity, and I think I try to reach folks in that way. I rely on my experience growing up poor, right, a lot. Because I think that helps, that gives credibility and honesty to my words. I'm not talking from theory, I'm talking from my lived experience. And so if you are trying to change whatever system you're trying to change, or whatever organization you're trying to change, or whatever thing you're trying to do, think about what can you do, and how, that's uniquely you. Like, how can you contribute in a way that is authentic to you, and operate from that space, because that space is your power, right? Like, that, and even white people, right? Reach out to other white folk, right? We know that they're going to be more receptive to you than us. Like, that's just facts, right? We know that, so if you have a passion for justice and equity and anti-racism and anti-Blackness, and then find ways that you can do it in your own community, harnessing what's unique about you,
and consistently, right? Like, one post a month doesn't do it. Find a way, a vehicle that works for you, and do it consistently. And then kids who want to be doctors, right? It's possible. We need you.
Yes.
Become
Oh
doctors.
my God.
See it. Make it happen.
Please. And seek mentorship. You can't beat what you can't see. You can't beat what you can't see. And sometimes even when you see it, you don't know how to get there. And so just reach out, even if it's like a cold call, like someone you don't know, and you're like, hey, I want to be like you. I want to get a piece of advice. I want to hear about your journey. People love talking about themselves, right? Like, if this is something you want to do, like, find folk who look like you, and who care about what you care about, and just reach out to them. And I promise someone will answer. It might not be everyone, right? But someone will answer, and that might be the aid you need to get you to that next step. And then once you're at that next step, who do I got to reach out to then, to get me to the next step? And then when you're there, okay, now I need, so I think that requires that radical vulnerability, right? To be able to say, like, I don't know the answer, and I don't know how to do it, and I don't know how to get there, but I'm going to look for it, and I'm willing to learn. Like, that kind of, that learner mindset is what's going to get you to this road. But if there's any, Black and brown folk, little kids out there, we absolutely need you. Patients deserve to see doctors and providers that look like them and that understand them culturally and linguistically, and that are going to advocate for them, because a lot of healthcare is advocacy, right? When a patient comes up to me and they want to see a dermatologist, me giving the dermatology referral is how I advocate for this patient. And you'll find that a lot of folk, they don't get the referrals that they need because their doctors aren't willing to give it to them. And so we need us in medicine, and we need us in here. And so absolutely, if to anyone who's interested in medicine, like, and if you're interested in social justice, like, please come on board.
Yes. Absolutely. Look, I want everyone to have your social media handles so they can follow you and stalk you like I do, and appreciate everything that you do, because it's very important. So would you share them, please?
Yeah, so it's Dr. Bryan Leyva, is BryanLeyva. You can find me on Instagram, on Twitter, on Clubhouse, on pretty much all social media platforms. Yeah, just come on board, engage. I can't guarantee you're gonna like everything that I have to say, but I'm gonna give you the space to say what you need to say, so you can expect that from me. But I can guarantee that that there's truth in what I'm saying, and I take that very seriously. I take my platform very seriously, and so welcome, come on board, come join us.
Look, thanks for making me feel like I can put down the gavel and sit back and enjoy what other people are doing, the younger generation is doing and putting out there, and just copy and paste and cut and share, because, you're on fire, and everything you're saying is so truthful. I just want to thank you again so much for coming and sharing space with me. And I want to give you the final word on what America needs to do to change the narrative, because that's what this show is about.
To change the narrative. Oh man, that's such a good question. I think we need to be honest, radically honest, about where we are, about our history, and about what kind of America we want to be. And I think if we're honest about that, I think we'll get to where we need to get to. But I think the very first step is being honest. Like, if you think something is bullshit, call it bullshit, right? If you think, we just need that level of honesty with ourselves, with each other, because that's how we begin to hold each other accountable. So,
accountability,
for example,
is the word.
Accountability, right? Like, I can't hold, if I'm lying about, for example, if I have an elected official who represents me and I'm not being honest about how this person is doing, what am I going to hold them accountable to?
Right.
The first step is like, oh, I think that you should be doing this, this, and that. I think you're not meeting my needs and the needs of my family, right? And just being honest about that allows that person to then think about, how can I work to meet those needs? And you can become their accountability partner, but you have to first be honest. Like, you have to do it. So that's my piece of advice, I guess.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Doc. I really appreciate your time. Really, it's very much an honor to have you on today, and I look forward to having you back.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye.
Take care.